Hello, everyone. Welcome. If you're in Australia, good evening. If you're in the UK, it's good morning. And if you're somewhere else, I'll just say hello. Um, Welcome to this joint presentation to the English Catholic History Association and the Australian Catholic Historical Society by Father Robert Cross. My name is William King. I'm the Secretary of the English Catholic History Association. This is the first in what will hopefully be several joint presentations between our two sister societies. The idea for this came from myself because of a family connection to one of Father Hawes' churches. And I thought it would be an interesting collaboration between two charities which have similar objectives to promote the interest of Catholic history in their respective countries. I'll now hand you over to the Secretary of our Australian Society, who will introduce our speaker, and we do hope that you will enjoy the talk today.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Oren O'Brien, and I'm a council member for the Australian Catholic Historical Society. I'm also a colleague who's worked closely with Father Robert, and so I asked if I could introduce him this evening. So I'm just going to read a few notes that I've got on Father Robert. Father Robert was ordained in 1978, and he then undertook a degree in archaeology at the University of Western Australia in 1995, followed by a master's degree in ecclesiastical cultural heritage at the Gregorian University in Rome. He's worked as a parish priest, Dean of Studies at St. Charles Seminary in Guildford, a university chaplain, and he's also been the executive assistant to the Archbishop of Perth before he took up his current position as the Director of Heritage and Chancellor for the Diocese of Geraldton. He's conducted a number of archaeological works throughout his career, including for the completion of St. Mary's Cathedral. And in fact, that's where I met Father Robert in 2006, a number of years ago, as an archaeology student. And it's where I met my wife. We were helping Father Robert exhume two bishops from underneath St. Mary's Cathedral. And then for our honeymoon, we subsequently went with him on a trip to France to exhume another Bishop of Perth. So we have an interesting shared history. In 2014, he became the Director of Heritage for the Diocese of Geraldton and Chair of the Board of Monsignor Hawes Heritage Incorporated. And if you'd like to find out more information about Monsignor Hawes Heritage Incorporated, there's a fantastic website which has a number of web pages with additional information. Father Robert was also the diocesan project manager for the restoration of Geraldton Cathedral, which was a $9 million project between 2015 and 2017. He has served on the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference National Liturgical Architecture and Art Council, and was part of the team that wrote the book Fit for Sacred Use in 2018. With that said, I'll pass over to Father Robert.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yes, thank you. Now, I'm not sure how I do this. I think I just click and we get into the first slide. I wonder if I can get rid of, there we are. Okay, so what I do is I'll just motor through these because if I don't, I might get sidetracked, and I'll probably just essentially go through what you see written there. So John Hawes' autobiography starts with a quote, "Well, isn't that the funniest little baby I've ever seen? Just like an old man, isn't his face just like an old bishop?" And this is attributed to his aunts and grandmother. John was born on the 7th of September, 1876, on the eve of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. His father and mother were Edward and Amelia Hawes, and he had two older brothers, Edward and Robert. They were a comfortable very comfortable, I'd say, middle class and devout Anglican family. Mostly the father was quite low church, or very low church, as I understand, with servants they had. And when John was born, they lived in 1 Spring Street, Richmond, which is still there. It became eventually, I think, a registry office, but now it's a private residence. I visited there some years ago. Edward Hawes was a solicitor and a partner in a London law firm. And John says in his autobiography, I found my real vocation when on the next birthday, a splendid large box of bricks was given me. There were blocks and beams of various different lengths, curved arches, pieces, round pillars and triangular spandrels, so you could build houses, bridges, harbours, forts and towers. Henceforth, and this is at the age of 5, I was an architect, engineer and builder. Each August, the Hawes family would go down to Bognor Regis in Sussex, and there they would enjoy their lives sailing around the ocean there. And I think eventually Hawes had, and his 2 brothers bought themselves a schooner, 5 tons or so, and would sail the seas around England. John had a love of animals, particularly horses and dogs, and Edward taught his sons to ride horses regularly, riding through Richmond Park. And in 1926, his Hawes's horse Babs, which he trained, won the maiden hack race in Yalgoo, a tiny little gold mining town 200 kilometres east of Geraldton. And Hawes occasionally rode his own horses. He was his jockey in local country race meetings. And there you can see a few photos of him. That strip photo down the bottom shows Hawes out front in his white, I presume, mare. And on the right-hand side, you can see the cup that he won. And that other photo is of him out in the countryside of Australia at an agricultural school that he designed. Hawes' passion for dogs and dog breeding might be traced to an anecdote he tells of his father's cousin, a Dr. Byrne, a medical doctor, who lived near the family, and he had a bull terrier named Fizz, who would break his chain, we're told, and run off to be with Hawes. So in Australia, Hawes bred pedigree Australian terriers and had a close bond with his beloved Domini. And you see there him sitting with his hands on Domini's back. And you can also see Domini on a wall that holds in a well of water at his presbytery in Mullawall. And he says that when leaving Geraldton for the Bahamas in 1939, he had to leave his dear cobber, Domini, behind. He wrote several years later how he kept a treasured photo of Domini, and each time he looked at it, tears welled up in his eyes and a choking lump in his throat. Hawes was wont to, in his correspondence, very often would draw these little cartoons. And you can see one there that is drawn in January 1939. And not long before he left Australia to go to the Bahamas, the Monsignor Hawes and Domini, Monsignor Hawes stretched out with his pipe and Domini sitting at his feet, waving his tail with the angles drawn in by Hawes, the architect, of course. At 13, after 4 years of preparatory schooling, John entered King's School in Canterbury, and the records, and he says that under the influence of the past, the great cathedral welcomed and sheltered me under its wings. I drank the cup of tradition. John had a talent for drawing, and while still in lower school, topped the whole school and won first prize for his sketch of the school's gatehouse. And while imbibing Canterbury, Hawes records his first effort as a sculptor, sculpting what he termed an idolatrous statue of Saint Benedict, being low church or come from a low church background. And you can see me in one of the archways of King's School there on the right, and a photo of Hawes with his class in Canterbury. In 1893, together with his brother Ted or Edward, in their Easter vacation, John travelled to France and landed in Caen, and entering several churches, he said, "I was in heaven, richly dim and mysterious, with twinkling lights and of candles, with priests offering the Holy Mass in little side chapels. The very atmosphere moved to worship. Truly, this was my Father's house." And there's some sketches that was put into the Building News on the 25th of September, 1896, of his time in Caen there. I hope I pronounced that right. 2 years later, Ted and John decided they'd go on a tandem bike ride through France, and on visiting Geraldton Cathedral, he said it to be the chief of the 7 joyous wonders of architecture, gushing forth of genius. I haven't been there myself, but one day I might. Throughout his life, John travelled extensively, taking every opportunity to study architecture and churches. And these travels took him to all those different places. He absorbed the architecture of these places, and in his own architectural genius, eclectically brought them together in a harmonious whole greater than the sum of their parts in the buildings that he designed. And it's one of the real features of Hawes's architecture. You can particularly see it in our cathedral here in Geraldton, a number of different architectural styles brought together in a harmony that, as I say, a bit is greater than the sum of their parts, the Gestalt theory. Hawes wanted to be a clergyman, but his father suggested, given his artistic skills, that he might become an architect. So in 1893, age 16, he got an articled traineeship with the architects Edmiston and Gabriel in Broad Street in London. And James Edmiston and with Henry Coe were the architects responsible for what Hawes termed a circus hall that's known as the Olympia in Kensington, which is still there, I understand. And there's an image of it back in the 19th century. Commercial architecture did not appeal to Hawes. He said churches were the only buildings I cared for. And Hawes believed architecture to be, as I think most architects do, the highest of the arts. In his evening, Hawes studied at the Architectural Association and the Royal Institute of British Architects. But the mecca for Hawes was the London Country Council Arts and Crafts School, where he mingled and learnt from sculptors, masons and metalworkers, bookbinders, house decorators, stained glass and textile workers, and many other arts and crafts. Among his teachers were the distinguished arts and crafts movement W.R. Letheby and E.S. Pryor. The principles of the arts and crafts movement underpin Hawes's architecture, and are really, if you really want to come to understand and know Hawes, you need to really have a deep appreciation of the arts and crafts movement. In his publication, Arts and Crafts Churches of Great Britain 2020, Roger Button states that John Cyril Hawes is almost unknown in Britain, unsurprisingly, as he left England in 1909. But he goes on to say that Hawes is arguably the most intriguing arts and crafts architect, and in some ways I'd say possibly the most prolific. But of course, only some of his buildings are in England, so he doesn't get a big coverage in the book, about 3 or 4 pages. The arts and crafts focused on people rather than ideals. It is a movement that reawakened interest in vernacular buildings, stressed the importance of craftsmanship, and laid the foundations of modern and postmodern architecture. That's what Button says. He goes on to say an arts and crafts church would be designed around the needs of its users rather than to a particular style. Hawes would also add that it needs to be built to the environment, to suit the environment. And that's why he railed against Gothic architecture in Australia, saying it's a Northern European architectural style that doesn't fit the Australian climate. And that's what makes Hawes so unique, and the cathedral here in Geraldton a real gem in terms of architecture, because it was built for the environment and it lent on so many different architectural styles. He says that it's built largely, an arts and crafts building is built largely by hand, and Hawes was very much a hands-on architect and builder. And as an industrial finish, he says an industrial finish can never match the beauty of hand craftsmanship. And because the craftsman can only be expected to produce beautiful work, if he is contented and living in harmony with the society around him and the environment, I would add, there is a strong social thread running through the movement. And of course, there is a social background to the arts and crafts movement. And I think that also in terms of, when you enter into a bit of the church's, the papal documents, we have that great document, Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII, that was issued in the 1890s, that pick up so much on those values of valuing the contribution of the artist, the artisan, the worker, and the respect that should be shown them and properly paid. In 1897, aged 21, Hawes completed his articles and went out on his own. I don't think he could get out of the office quick enough. His first architectural work was a family holiday home in Bognor Regis in Sussex, and you can see there, you can see it on the left-hand side. It was it didn't have a view of the ocean, so Hawes built it up. Each of those front windows there on the left part of the building are actually rooms in the house, and there's a stairway that goes up. You see those little windows on the right. I've been there, and on the top up there, you've got a lookout. And the house then extends out the back. In addition, Hawes designed several small houses near the White Tower, which still are in existence. You can see the former Bishop of Geraldton on the right-hand side there, unveiling a blue plaque on that building on the White Tower. And one of the in the middle there, you can see that boar, which is holding up behind the people's heads in the photo above it on the left. You can see that that's a little detail, arts and crafts detail of Hawes in the building. Inside, the rooms were painted by one of his brothers, who these murals of medieval armies marching along. Very well done, beautiful, and the detail is wonderful. In 1898, Hawes entered a model of a conceptual church in the Royal Academy exhibition, which was viewed by an Anglican bishop, Wilfrid Bird Hornby, from Northumberland. And he invited Hawes to design a church for a village in Gunnerton in Northumberland. And this was duly consecrated in November 1900. You can see the church there. That was taken during our recent pilgrimage, we call it, to Hawes's buildings in England. And underneath is the drawings dating back into 1898 or so, and one of his little sketches on the right hand of St. Christopher's, Gunnerton. Before going to Gunnerton, Hawes speaks of his conversion in this manner. The call, Vespers in St. Thomas Regent Street, sermon by Canon Rhodes Bristow. And the Lord said to Abraham, go forth out of thy country and come into the land I shall show thee. By faith he went out, not knowing whither he went. I think that should be whither he went. Cord from my drawing board, the very symbol of my worldly ambitions, I literally threw down my T-square as Lysias, his plough, and James and John, their nets. If you look carefully at that T-square there, you'll see Hawes's name inscribed thereon. Hawes attempted to join the university's mission of to Central Africa, but was rejected. There's some suspicion that his family might have got to the decision makers before Hawes got the announcement that he couldn't go. He said, "In a black night I cast my bread upon the waters," quoting Ecclesiasticus, and received my Franciscan vocation. I felt a growing admiration and love for St. Francis of Assisi, and I tried to live as simply and plainly as possible. Remembering Hawes had a very comfortable life. He had his own nanny and went to the best of schools, and they didn't want for anything, the family. But he was trying to give this all up. Throughout his life, Hawes sought to walk the way of St. Francis of Assisi. And there on the far right, interestingly, is a window in a church in Nassau in the Bahamas. And he's very well regarded there, almost, one might say, as a saintly man. I'm a little bit sort of timid in saying that because currently we have progressed the cause of Monsignor Hawes to the point where we can now call him Servant of God, John Cyril Hawes. And in the cathedral in Nassau, he features in a very large stained glass window that's sort of meters and meters across. It'd have to be 10 or more meters across and maybe 4 or 5 meters high. He features in as one of the founding fathers, you might say, of the Archdiocese of Nassau. And they've actually given him a halo there, which if the Congregation for the Causes of Saints find out might be a bit problematic. But anyway, there he is. In true humility and like Francis of Assisi, Hawes resisted becoming a clergyman, but eventually is persuaded by Bishop Hornby to enter Lincoln Theological College in Michaelmas term in 1901. He was ordained an Anglican priest in 1903. During his time at Lincoln Theological College, Hawes designed the gatehouse and the chapel, as well as the Abbey Church in Our Lady and St. John at Alton Abbey in Hampshire. So there you can see it. And I think Henry said that's currently on the market. So if anyone wants to buy it, who knows? Also, while resident at Lincoln College, Hawes designed a church chapel for an Anglican Benedictine community led by Abbot Aelred Carlisle at Painsthorpe in Yorkshire. It has since been converted into a garage, but you can see Hawes's sketch of his plans there, a little sort of cartoon of its interior, and what it looks like now, a garage. That's the part facing out in front of the photo. After ordination, Hawes became a junior curate at the Church of the Holy Redeemer in Clerkenwell, London, where he ministered from 1903 to 1906. We visited this church in our pilgrimage, and there's a lovely, well, I don't think he'd be that young, but he looks very young, and he wowed a few of our female pilgrims dressed in his soutane and sash. But he's very high church, and this church has always been a very high church. There is a reference to Hawes designing the clergy house and the campanile of the church, but this is disputed and said to be the work of the architect Henry Wilson. You can see the tower in front. The lower section of that tower is where the Father Christopher and his family live. However, in a handwritten list of buildings, Hawes says he includes this building amongst his designs. So it is possible he had some involvement together with Wilson, even be it just a sketch or other, because that's oftentimes, I think, he didn't do much more in some of these places other than providing a sketch, and then the builders had to work it out. In 1902, Hawes designed a billiards room and additional rooms at his uncle's private residence at the Grove in Norfolk there. In June 1906, Hawes resigned from Clerkenwell and was engaged by Abbot Aelred Carlisle to build an Anglican Benedictine monastery on Cordy Island in Wales. Hawes designed the monastery guest house, which is the building on the top left. He converted a nearby ancient watchtower down in the right-hand corner into an oratory, as well as a barn that was once an ancient priory chapel. He converted that into the community chapel. That's that little sketch at the bottom there. You can see other plans of the building, the guest house there as well. Hawes' Cordy Island monastery design was not grand enough for Abbot Aelred. Aelred had got this island off some very rich person and who sponsored him, and he had very grand plans. Even grander than the plan you can see there that Hawes designed in the top left-hand side, with a huge spire and a church, abbatial church. So anyway, Abbot Aelred engaged another architect, and John Coates Carter, who designed what you currently see on Cordy Island, which isn't all that impressive from my visit, at least, my impression. So maybe there was a much more grander building that eventually they never got around to building. So they might have been better to stay with Hawes. Hawes restored the little church of St. David and the little St. Illard's Priory with its funny little tower, stone arrangement on top of its tower there. Hawes had a deal with Abbot Aelred that he would undertake his novitiate with the Benedictine community on Cordy Island, but make his religious profession as a Franciscan with a view to founding an Anglican Franciscan community. So Abbot Aelred eventually refused to receive Hawes's religious profession, I think because he wanted him to be a Benedictine, but he also seemed to be impressing another of Abbot Aelred's novices, who I think finished up going away with Hawes to become a Franciscan. So Hawes took his vows of poverty, chastity and obedience before a lifelong high church friend, the Reverend Honourable James Granville Adderley, who was the son of the first Baron Norton, who had introduced Hawes to St. Francis of Assisi. So he had friends in high places, one might say. Following the example of St. Francis, and on the feast of the saint, 7th of October 1907, Hawes stepped into his Franciscan life by making a tramp through England for 6 weeks. And he said, I learnt much. So basically he went without anything, no money, just very rough clothing, and tramped the streets of England and the countryside. After the tramp, Hawes was offered the mission church of St. Francis of Assisi in the parish of Saltley, Birmingham, by the Reverend Adderley, where he established a Franciscan friary. Hawes was at the mission church a year when he received a pleading letter from Bishop Hornby, now the Anglican Bishop of the Bahamas, to come and repair 12 stone churches that had been damaged by a hurricane. With the blessing of Reverend Adderley, Hawes travelled in January 1909 for his new parish of Long Island in the Bahamas, and for the next 2 years repaired the damaged churches. You can see there on the left-hand St. Mary's after the hurricane, 1908, and St. Mary's rebuilt 1910. And when I saw that image of the church down the bottom, the repaired church, it reminded me very much of a church that Hawes had built here in Morawar in Australia, and I think it's almost identical. So he was quite apt at sort of reusing designs. So that's quite interesting. Next time I go to the Bahamas, I'll have to have a closer look. In late 1910, Hawes read an article in the journal The Lamp, in which a personal acquaintance, Father James Francis, had written an article, The Necessity for Certitude. He said, having read it twice, he writes, I threw the paper down on the floor. That finishes me. From that hour, I began to set my house in order and to pack up. This is the great voyage, the crossing over. My heart had long been in Rome. Now my head was wringing me bodily. And then he quotes Tennyson, Crossing the Bar. He actually, his quote is a bit different to what you find in the books, or at least on the internet. And it says, sunset and evening star, and after that the dark. And may there be no moaning on the bar when I embark. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound or foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. So he sees it as a coming home. Hawes was received into the Catholic Church on the 19th of March 1911 by Father Paul of the Society of the Atonement, the author of that article, at Graymore in New York State. After 2 months' instruction, Hawes complains about the quality of the food, smoked herring, salted herring or something. He thought it was uneatable, but that might go against his sainthood. Father Paul himself, together with all the friars at Graymore, had only recently converted from Anglicanism themselves. And in less than a month after arriving, Hawes had designed a chapel for Graymore with the foundation stone laid on the 17th of March 1911. So he'd only there for about a month or 2 months by the time they laid the foundation stone. And only 2 days before Hawes himself was received into the Catholic Church. So you can see there Hawes's sketch of the building in the top. And when you look below and count the windows and look at the location of the different windows and the arches down the bottom of the church, you can see that it is essentially Hawes's design. Another architect came along, Hawes talks about, and says that he did his changes were admirable, and he changed the tower on the front section of the church. After being received into the Catholic Church, Hawes returned to England to consider his future. He discerned that he would be best suited to become a Catholic secular priest rather than a religious priest, but this would involve 3 years seminary formation. He determined to fund his own formation, and in June 1911, he crossed the Atlantic again, this time to Canada, where he unsuccessfully tried to find work as an architect, but finished up working as a mule skinner for the Canadian Pacific Railway at Crow's Nest Pass construction camp. There he cheated death a couple of times before returning to England in December 1911. Hawes had a very good friend, Charles and Winifred Selby Hall. Hawes had studied with Charles at Lincoln Theological College, and he wanted, Charles wanted to give a priest to God. That's a quote from Hawes's autobiography. He himself couldn't be a priest since he was married. And Hawes was reluctant but gracious to accept their sponsorship, and he entered the Beta College on the 12th of January 1912 to commence his formation. There in early December 1913, at the end of a couple of years into his time there, he was introduced to Bishop William Bernard Kelly. He's the first Bishop of Geraldton, which is a vast diocese in Western Australia, established in 1898, and it covers 500,000 square miles in English terms in Australia, 1.3 million square kilometres. Over the years, it's been chopped and added to it, but currently it's 1.3 million square kilometres. You can see Bishop Kelly there. It's an interesting thing, Aaron might be interested in this, that in the autobiography of Hawes, it's Hawes who says that Bishop Kelly was born on the ship coming to Australia. So that's the source of that theory. And I'd imagine it's probably true because they were dear friends. And you can see Bishop Kelly in his automobile, early automobile, out at Kew, which is a gold mining area of this diocese, about 400 kilometres from Geraldton. And that was the centre of the diocese at the time because there were more people living in Kew chasing the gold than there was in Geraldton. Bishop Kelly invited Hawes to become a priest of the diocese and to design its cathedral. "I haven't much to offer you," he said, "but it is a real apostolic missionary life." How could Hawes resist? Hawes was always wanting to be a missionary priest. So there you can see his early design. That's December 1913. So it's the same month, that drawing on the left, the three elevations of the cathedral were actually drawn in Rome, sight unseen. So it's quite interesting. I suspect Bishop Kelly may have given Hawes a photo of the site because he actually draws the cathedral then on a location which is very much like where it is. And then you can see other drawings by Hawes and the altar on the right-hand side. On the 2nd of November 1915, Hawes arrived in Fremantle on the SS Malwa and travelled by train to Geraldton, and on the 28th, arriving here soon on the 29th or so. And then he was sent to relieve the local parish priest who was on holidays, I presume, in the Goldfields parish of Mount Magnet, 300 kilometres east of Geraldton. And he says it was a baptism of fire. He wrote to his friend Salbert Charles, "It was far too hot to do anything but flop around, struggling to exist with a temperature of 110 degrees in the shade all the time. Far too hot to do anything but alternatively drink from the water bag and lie down in a bath. The burning wind dries you up." You can see Hawes there in his pith helmet and cane. The ultimate sort of Englishman, you might say, with a model of the cathedral on the table behind him. And there's a photo later of Hawes in a white coat next to Bishop Kelly, who's quite aged there. In March 1916, Hawes was appointed the first parish priest at Mullawar, 100 kilometres east of Geraldton, and he began his preparations for the construction of the cathedral. Site works commenced in May and building in September. The foundation stone, you can see there top-hand corner, was taken from the original St. Francis Xavier's Church that was built in 1870 and relocated to the cathedral. Interestingly, Hawes had a bit of identification with the builder of that first church, because that priest, he was a priest too, Father LeCale, and he built a number of churches here in the Midwest of Western Australia. And I think Hawes understood the strains and stresses that he would have been under. And he actually had his body exhumed and relocated to a cemetery chapel that he built here in Geraldton. That's Father LeCale. He's a man from Belgium. Stage one of the cathedral consisted of the nave and the front section, the towers. In those towers, currently, we have the bells of Godalming, 8 ancient bells dating back to the 12th century that were purchased in our latest cathedral conservation program and relocated here, along with another 19 bells, giving our cathedral here in Geraldton the largest carillon of bells in all of Australia, in any church, that is. And interestingly, the bells are connected to our pipe organ and they can be played together with the organ. In 1916, Hawes designed a sheep station homestead for Malangata Station, 200 kilometres east-northeast of Geraldton, for a family called Caleb Child, for the Williamson family. And this is his first domestic design building in Australia. You can see that on the right-hand side in that photo of the building, a tower on the right-hand side, so that the pastoralist could go up onto the tower and survey his land. You can also see the little chapel on the left-hand side that's built into that residence. And and very arts and crafts. Hawes was one of the, I think, the earliest, amongst the earliest artists to start using Portland cement as a art medium. You can see him how he's crafted the cement into that holy water stoop. The missionary Hawes set about ministering to the Aboriginal people of Mullawa and established an outdoor mass setting he termed the Mission Dolores on the edge of town. He affectionately known today as Mass Rock. He designed a building facade, you can see it on the left-hand side there, for the site, but this was never constructed. But we still have an annual Mass there, and it's still very much a tourist place. Hawes also painted a triptych on the chapel wall, you can see it there, of the Presentation Convent. He also painted 2 adjacent windows as faux stained glass. I was up there just the other last Saturday, and I was I'm a little bit perplexed that the 2 windows have disappeared, and they've been replaced with new windows without any notification to myself. And I hope they've preserved them because they were fairly worn out. The painting on them it was barely visible, but they should still be kept and stored in our archives. So I'm trying to sum up the courage to ask where they are. On the 2nd of October in 1919, Hawes designed the Convent of the Sacred Heart, and it was opened, it was opened on that date, I think, by Bishop Kelly. He also designed a convent chapel that was never built, and you can see those in the images below. A very Gothic style building. Currently, that's been damaged along with a number of our churches here in the diocese in a cyclone a couple of years ago, over 2 years now, and we're still repairing that building. All up, it's cost us about $5 million repairing these buildings. Luckily, the insurers are paying it. In February 1920, Hawes went back to England for a holiday, and passing through the Bahamas, he was tempted to take up a position there, but he knew that should have a K in it. He knew he had more to do in Australia, but the idea of returning to the Bahamas as a Catholic missionary was planted, and he eventually took that up in 1939, 19 years later. While in England, he commenced plans for the Mullawa Parish Church, and you can see his first sketch there, Our Lady of Mount Carmel and the Holy Apostles Peter and Paul. And Hawes commenced construction on the church on the 24th of May 1921. In October 1921, Hawes commenced work on the Dominican convent and chapel of St. Hyacinth in the gold mining and pastoral town of Yalgoo. And he wrote that the temperatures reached 118 degrees Fahrenheit, 48 degrees Celsius during construction. And Hawes himself did much of the masonry work on the church, and it opened in February 1922. So in the space of 3 months or 3 or 4 months, they built that little church and chapel. And again, Hawes has crafted cement and all sorts of things into that building. On the 26th of December 1928, Hawes' patron, Bishop William Bernard Kelly, died. Excuse the missing apostrophe there. Hawes had his body interred in St. Francis Xavier's Cathedral and built a sarcophagus topped with a beaten copper effigy of the bishop, crafted by Pietro Pacelli. You can see it there in the cathedral, in the forefront of that image of the cathedral. And you can see the funeral procession of Bishop Kelly going through the streets of Geraldton back in 1921. In May 1922, Hawes was called upon by Archbishop Clune to design a cathedral for the Perth Archdiocese. At first, this was to be an enlargement of the 1865 cathedral, but it evolved to be a totally new structure. And regretfully, after Hawes had drawn up detailed plans and he travelled to Europe to purchase stained glass windows, etc., the contract was removed and given to another architect. This decision was Perth's loss. On the 29th of July 1923, Bishop Richard Ryan was consecrated the Bishop of Geraldton. He was not enamoured with the architecture of Hawes, and work ceased on the cathedral and other diocesan buildings that Hawes was contemplating, and Bishop Kelly, of course. So during this time, Hawes concentrated his energy on the ongoing construction of this amazing church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Mullawa, which was officially opened on the 1st of May 1927. So Hawes basically built that building on his own. He did have some masons help with the walls, but every detail and artwork there is essentially Hawes's work. And you can see there the facade of the church on the left-hand side. And he's modelled that on a church he visited in France at Arles, St. Trophime's. You can see it there on the right-hand side. And underneath the bishop. On the right-hand side, you can see a perspective of the church and the presbytery he built behind the church or adjacent to it. And these are just some of the art and artistries in the church in Mullawa. This was Hawes, uninhibited and unrestricted. He did what he wanted, and he built a church as he thought a church should be. And even down to the painting there of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. He designed his own stained glass windows. He'd send the designs off to England to be made. You can see the altar, the sanctuary there with his crucifix, and his little saying is written on that, as it is also in another crucifix he painted, Esther, Esther, Jesu, Jesu, Esther mihi Jesus, 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 be unto me, Jesus. He's got the mandatory gargoyle there. Some say that he designed the gargoyle's face upon the Bishop Ryan's face, but who knows? And that's underneath the baldacchino, which is over the altar, the Holy Spirit hovering in the epiclesis of the Eucharistic prayer. You've got there the a memorial cross to the victims of World War I. And in the facade of the church, you've got this beautiful, the seven sacraments represented in these panels. You might say, call it the tympanum of the church. And then he has the Eucharist panels in telling 5 elements of the Eucharist: the sacrifice of Abraham, the sacrifice of Aaron, and then the Eucharist in terms of the Mass Eucharistic processions and First Holy Communion. And he designed one of these he crafted this out of cement, this amazing Paschal candle stand that some parish priest decided to take down and turn into an ambo. One day I'll get it back up as a Paschal candle stand. But it's a magnificent example and modelled on very early church Paschal candle stands. In 1926, Bishop Ryan was translated to the Diocese of Sale, and Hawes recommenced work on the cathedral, on the sanctuary and crypt. And there's a couple of images of the crypt there. And the central chapel of Our Lady of Sorrows is dedicated to the soldiers of World War I. One of the interesting little features in this chapel, and whether it's by design or accident, I don't know, but you can see it there in that photo of the chapel where these intersecting lines of light, or 2 lines of light, intersect to form a cross on the floor of the chapel. And they beam up into the reliquaries of pre-5th century soldier martyrs that Hawes had installed in the reliquaries. Unfortunately, they've been stolen over the years. But if anyone knows of any relics around of St. Sebastian, Saints John and Paul, and St. George, I would love to get them to reinsert in the reliquaries. I've tried the Vatican, but they won't let us have any. In 1929, Hawes found time to build a presbytery, the priest house for himself in Mullawa, and upon completion he found it far too comfortable, he said, for his Franciscan self, and he said he had built it for his successors. It was a piece of England in Australia. You go inside and it's this beautiful sort of cottage. You can see there in the photographs of what it looked like. I put down the bottom there an image that's this ceramic plaque that Hawes has on the outside of the chimney. The chimney you can see on the left-hand side in the top picture It's an image of Janus, the god of beginning and endings. We get the word January from this god. And next to it, you'll see a heart. And that's on, you see above it, the fireplace and the little copper hood above the fire and the heart emblazoned thereon. Hawes has written on the doorway of this priest house a Latin inscription that faces inwards, so that it's the priest who sees it when he opens the front door. And it says in Latin, Janus partet or Margus. The door is open, the heart even more. It's the motto, I think, of the Trappists. And so Hawes lived that in his life. And it's symbolized not only in the inscription, of course, but also in the fact that he's put Janus on the outside of the chimney, Janus partet, and he put the heart, Paul Margus, on the inside of the chimney on the fireplace, where one is warmed by the fire. On the 11th of May 1930, Bishop James Patrick O'Collins was made the third Bishop of Geraldton, and he and Hawes got on exceptionally well. Bishop O'Collins put Hawes's skills to work and basically exhausted the poor man, I'd say. And this was the beginning of Hawes's most prolific period as an architect. And I'm just going to shoot through now some of the other churches that he's built here in the diocese. So this is that little church I'd said, that the hurricane restored church in the Bahamas. It's almost identical as far as I'm concerned. And that's the interior. And notice he's used the striping around the walls. I don't see them as stripes, I see them as circles, symbolising the infinite God, no beginning, no end. Then you've got the priest lodge in Morrell. This is a little building he built for the occasions that he would go down there. The length of the interior is a man's body, 6 foot, and a dog at his feet. And he would sleep there with his little fireplace and his quadripartite, brick-lined, vaulted ceiling above him. It's an amazing little building, and said by some to be the smallest presbytery in the world. But I did know in the Bahamas he built a couple of similar structures. There's this little church. This is a chapel of ease at Kojarina, just east of Geraldton. This is the church in the town 400 kilometres north of Geraldton, Carnarvon. You're into the tropics in this part of the world. Then you've got this amazing little building, the Hermitage, that Hawes intended to retire to, but he never did. He finished up, as I say, going to the Bahamas and built himself a hermitage there. That's yours faithfully in the middle there with his Camino's shell around his neck. And this place with its hearts in the windows there, and it's a very quaint building, beautiful, and very much as Hawes built it and furnished. We're now using this as an Airbnb, so if you come to Geraldton, you can book in there. Here we got the opening of the San Spirito Cemetery Chapel, and again this amazing quadripartite brick-lined ceiling, a painting of Hawes there with Jesu estu mihi Jesus. Again, the baldacchino that hovers over the altar. You can see the altar there. And this is a sarcophagus on the right-hand side in the nave section. And in the floor, in the front of that sarcophagus, is a brass plaque where Hawes intended to have himself buried. And it says to pray for the architect of the cathedral and this place and other places whose body rests here. But of course it doesn't. It rests under the Hermitage on Cat Island on Mount Alvernia. So this is an amazing little building, and we're just in the process of trying to get funds to restore it because it's in a bad condition at the moment. This is one of Hawes's most beautiful churches, really. It's Our Lady in Araceli. He didn't name the church. It was named in the 1870s by Le Cale, named after the church on the Capitoline Hill in Rome, because it's built on a hill. And it's what's amazing about this, and it illustrates again an arts and crafts thing of building to nature. And then when you look at the front facade of this building, it's sort of what do you call, the courses are gouged out, and it looks like a cliff face. And the interior, he had a bit of an argument with the parish priest because the parish priest wanted the Gothic church. Hawes was not, didn't not like Gothic, but he didn't think it suited the Australian climate. But he built a Norman tower on the right-hand side there. Again, this mix of architectural styles. And inside, he got his way a little bit with the Romanesque arches down the arcades on the right and left-hand side. And that's a little baptismal font, according to Hawes's design. He designed these two buildings at an agricultural school out of Geraldton. This is another little church in Geraldton that was demolished except for the back section where the tower is. And again, it was striped on the inside. That's Bluff Point. This is a little church that we've just finished doing up after the cyclone, and we've repainted the interior and trying to follow what Hawes's art on the right-hand side. You can see Hawes's colour painting, watercolour of what the church was meant to look like, and his sketch on the left. So we've tried to be faithful. It has a baldacchino over the altar and the 12 apostles and Christ in glory. And he also designed a monastery for the Palatines at an Aboriginal mission east of Geraldton. And this is one of his school churches and a convent that he built in a nearby place. Finally, in 1938, the cathedral was completed in Geraldton. You can see there an original black and white photo and the crowds that gathered for the blessing in 1938. And then that's the interior of the cathedral as it looks today. And there you can see the finished after the 2017 reopening of the cathedral. You can see the cathedral in its setting here in Geraldton with the forecourt, with a labyrinth, which is identical in size and patination to that in Chartres Cathedral. And Hawes's model of the cathedral and one of his early drawings. And I think that's it really, because that's about all I've got, and I've probably spoken too long anyway.
Thank you very much, Father Cross. Thank you. That was a fascinating international tour. We've been around the world at least once, and it's wonderful to see so many images to accompany the story of what Father Hawes built. If
and
anyone
we didn't get to the Bahamas either, so there might be another tour.
Yes, another
Maybe
tour.
Your cousin can give that.
Yes, well, I was struck actually when you showed one of the, I can't remember where, one of the churches. I was struck by how similar it was to one of the churches in the Bahamas. Because he also did a St. Peter and Paul's church in the Bahamas, which also had a tower and a dome, just like the one in Australia.
Yes.
You can definitely see the genealogy.
Yes.
If anyone has any questions for our speaker, please do enter them into the chat box on your toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Don't be shy. Whilst you're doing that, Father, if I can start off. I know you said towards the beginning that Hawes believed that an architect should be designing buildings in a community where he or she presumably was personally very comfortable. And from what you said about him building a proposed retirement home in the Diocese of Geraldton and building his tomb in the Diocese of Geraldton, that he was obviously very comfortable living in Western Australia. Do you think that explains why he was so prolific and so committed to projects in that part of the world?
Possibly. I think towards the end, he got on very well with Bishop O'Collins, not so well with the previous bishop, and of course the first bishop, Bishop Kelly. Um, I think he wasn't. I think he was a very driven man, and probably wasn't easy to live with, as driven people often are. And so I think he certainly under Bishop O'Collins was quite content, but given the amount of work and some of the battles he had to fight with fellow priests who didn't want his designs or wanted to modify things that he had, drawn. I think that wore him out eventually, and he was the call to the eremitical life returned, and so he did go off to the Bahamas without really telling the bishop. The bishop knew he was going away, but didn't know that he wasn't coming back. But as I said, I didn't say this, he remained always a priest of the Geraldton diocese. He never resigned or asked to be incardinated in the Bahamas. And he corresponded regularly with Bishop O'Collins and the Bishop of Geraldton, Bishop Gummer, who took over from O'Collins. There are other buildings there that I haven't mentioned that he built here too. A very large building when he had left Australia. He continued to send designs back to Geraldton, and he built a nursing home which currently houses the Sisters of Nazareth from London. When I go to London, I've stayed there in their place, and the Little Sisters of Nazareth. And it houses over 120 elderly people and people with dementia and so forth now. And it's a classic monastery design, a square building with didn't have a well, but it had a pond in the middle of the courtyard. Yeah.
Thank you.
Waters of salvation well up, of course.
No, thank you. I was wondering if he had maintained his contact with Australia after he moved to the Bahamas. So thank you. You've answered that as well.
Yes, he was quite a prolific writer, and just this last year I obtained copies of all his correspondence that he wrote to Bishop O'Collins when he moved to the Diocese of Ballarat in Victoria. I haven't had a chance to read it all yet.
Thank you. I'll just have a look at questions in the chat. We've got a question here. Why did Hawes build Malangata? I hope I've said that right.
Malangata. Why did he build it? Well, Hawes, didn't sit around in his presbytery like a lot of modern priests seem to be doing, twiddling their thumbs, perhaps too afraid to go out in case they get accused of some abusive situation. But he was very much the missionary, very much out amongst the families. There's a wonderful, and so he would have mixed with the, and would have actually, when he travelled, he often travelled on horseback with another horse carrying his bits and pieces, and he would stay at these places because he would only travel 30 or so miles a day. He was a very good horseman, and he actually won a horse race, the Yalgoo Cup. That slide didn't seem to come up. I think it didn't come up anyway. But he was a very good horseman, and also bred Australian terriers, of which Domini was one. His dog was one. They had very aristocratic names, English aristocratic names he gave them. And but I think that he would have known these people because he would have stayed overnight quite often at their places and got to know them well. That was even the case up until when I was studying to be a priest in the seminary. I remember staying on one of these station properties overnight because we went out to say mass at a bush race meeting. There was no town there. It was just a racetrack in the middle. The nearest town was 100 kilometres away. But that race meeting continues to happen. The Landor races. So Hawes would have known the people very well, and I think that's why he would have been asked to build that Balangata station homestead.
Thank you. Tony and Judy have pointed out that many of the early photographs were actually taken by Father Hawes himself.
Yes. He somewhere in our archives. There once was somewhere in the bishop's house a camera that I remember, and and it sort of dates back to the time, I'd say about the period that Hawes was here, and I often wonder whether it was Hawes's camera, but some of our energetic clergy, I think, have thrown it away or thrown it out, but it may crop up one day. I'm keeping my eye open for it.
Just one final question, Father. There are so many fascinating buildings that he constructed. Do you yourself have a personal favourite?
Yeah. Probably the Utakara Cemetery Chapel is amongst my favourites. But they all have a different character and charm, and I guess the cathedral is particularly my favourite because it's where I was baptised. I received all my sacraments. Geraldton is my home parish, so I grew up here, and I've served in the parish as a curate, and now I do a Sunday mass there each weekend. I try to cultivate the choir and try to cultivate some quality ecclesiastical music, as opposed to the atrocious music that we've had inflicted upon us for the last 30 or 40 years. It is atrocious, and no wonder people don't go to mass these days, having to put up with the rubbish that's fed to us, unfortunately, by people who should know who should know better. But that shows the state of liturgical formation in our seminaries, which I've been railing against for years as well. Vatican II said that the Church, that liturgy should be a major subject in seminary formations, and it should be. The Ars Celebranda has been lost by our clergy, and they think they're on a stage performing rather than offering sacrifice to Christ or to God, and bringing the community with them, marching together under the arch of triumph as a good church should have. Anyway, I'm rattling on, but I think that that the cathedral, every time I go in there, I seem to, something takes my eye. It could be the way the light is reflecting or what have you. I should say that Hawes cultivated a relationship with arts and crafts people in England, and the Stations of the Cross in our cathedral are done by Clark, who was one of the foremost sculptors in England around the 1940s. There's a window there by, just can't remember his name, it's not coming to me at the moment, who designed all the windows for the League of Nations buildings of stained glass. And there's one of his windows in our cathedral. And a person in England, in Shropshire, I went over. They had an exhibition. I was invited to go over to visit the exhibition of her works in Shrewsbury, and I met the sheriff of Shrewsbury while I was there, or Shropshire while I was there, and she, this lady. Is a woman by the name of Margaret Rope. She was studied stained glass windows, arts and crafts style, and did some amazing windows in the Shrewsbury Cathedral. The family, again, is a convert. A lot of Hawes's friends were converts, from the, I guess, the tail end of the Oxford movement in a way. And so Margaret Rope has 6 windows in our cathedral here that Hawes designed. He did the cartoons and he would send it to Margaret. Margaret would make them beautiful. And Margaret herself, as I say, was a convert. She used to ride motorbikes and smoke cigars, I'm told, but that was before she became a Carmelite nun. so I call her the cigar-smoking, motorbike-riding Carmelite nun when I'm giving tours of the cathedral. But she has... there's a particular window in the cathedral that's dedicated to a fellow by the name of Louis Patrick Rebecki, who came from out east of Geraldton. He would have been probably in Monsignor Hawes's parish, and he went off to World War I and was killed in 1917 on Good Friday, and the family installed this window for him. And in the bottom panel, it shows this battle scene in France and Patrick's body dressed as an Australian soldier with his slouch hat on the ground beside him, clutching a pair of rosary beads. And above him, Stella Matutina, the Star of the Morning, Our Lady, Star of the Morning, looking down over the battle scene. And above that is another panel with Mary seated in glory, the Queen, and she's receiving from an angel an orb, and inside the orb is a tiny figure of Patrick Louis Rebecki. So his soul is being presented to his heavenly mother. So it's a magnificent, very poignant window. And that's one of the things that amazes me about our cathedral, is that it was started in World War I at a time of great sorrow and grief and completed just before World War II. And part of the work was, of course, carried on through the Great Depression. So it's an amazing thing that it was ever built.
Thank you. I'm very surprised you mentioned Margaret Rope, Father, because I volunteer at the church where she was baptised.
Ah, right.
And we've just displayed a window of hers that we've had in storage for many, many years, about 8 weeks ago, that she designed with her cousin. So do come and see us if you're ever in the area again.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you to the Australian Catholic Historical Society for helping put this talk on. It is being recorded and it will be available on the English Catholic History Association's YouTube channel. We do monthly Zoom talks such as this. If anyone is interested, wherever you may be, do look at our programme of events, and our Australian Sister Society have a programme of their talks on their website as well. So thank you again, Father, for such a fascinating talk. And
thank you very much for your patience.
It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you. And so visually interesting as well. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to everyone for attending. And I hope you will enjoy the rest of your day or evening, wherever you may be. And do join us again for another talk. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody, or good afternoon.